Hello, I'm John Beattie. Welcome to Cask to Glass, the whisky podcast where I explore the heritage and the flavour of Scotland's national drink and the world's favourite spirit. Now, in previous episodes, we've talked about the importance of whisky glasses. So in this episode, I'm at the Glencairn Crystal factory talking to the company's founder, Raymond Davidson, and the renowned whisky author, Charles Maclean.
All it took was one sip of the water of life.
Thank you so much for letting us come into this lovely building, and I appreciate it very much. Can we just start with Charles then? How do you take your whiskey?
In a glass. I take it when I'm evaluating it, when I'm appreciating it. I use a glass like this, which we'll talk about later, I'm sure. When I'm drinking for pleasure, just down the hatch, I'll use a tumbler. But I think it's for enjoyment. Tumblers are fine. For appreciation, it is essential to have a glass where the rim narrows slightly to direct the aroma up your nose.
Neat or with water?
I would start neat, and then I would add water. Water tends to open up the aroma, because the crucial thing is, as you know, John, you smell before you taste. It's all part of flavour, is a combination of smell, taste and texture, mouthfeel. And so it's essential that the glass, for appreciation, that the glass really displays the aroma to best advantage.
Raymond, we're here because of you, right? This is your place, and you invented these glasses. But how do you, when you have a whiskey, how do you take your whiskey?
Do you know, it's similar to Charlie. The reason the glass came about, I would go into a bar and I would ask for a whiskey, any whiskey, and I would generally ask the barman, would you mind putting it into a small wine glass? So I was doing this for years, and I always felt uncomfortable, a bit self-conscious drinking it out of this. And I said, if I've got a crystal factory, I should do something about this. So I decided to do it, and I based the glass that I envisaged, based it on the Capita sherry that master blenders use. The Capita sherry, as you know, the aperture is very small. So I opened that up, widened the bowl, and then, just as I felt self-conscious with the stemmed glass, I decided no self-respecting whiskey drinker wants a stem in his glass. I took that away, married it to that more robust thistle shape, and that's how it came about.
But when you drink whiskey, do you drink it neat?
If it's a whiskey I know and like, I'm quite happy, just like Charlie, to use a tumbler. I like, as long as it's a fine rim, not too big. In fact, the original glass I designed was even smaller than that Glencairn glass, because I liked small measures. Plenty of them, but that was just me. But I like a tumbler as well.
All right, so you invented this glass. Talk me through that process then. When you sat down one day, because I looked at your back history. You were Honeywells. You then went on to various things. You know, you've both got pretty rich histories in terms of non-whiskey to start with, then into whiskey. So when you invented it, what was the process?
Well, that was basically it. Because I like Charlie, I always nosed my whiskey before I drank it. It's a unconscious thing. It was, and so I started with that premise. It would need to have that style to appreciate the nose of the whiskey first of all, and then the Capita sherry, as I say, was too small an aperture. I had to open that up to make it a drinkable Capita, if you like, and that's how it went. Yeah.
Another key thing as well, the Capita has, as Raymond says, has a wee stem, which makes it fragile. These are much more robust, and so for catering purposes, you stick them in the washing machine, and that's fine. Whereas the Capitas, they don't stand up properly. And I often use a Capita for my assessment if I didn't have one of these ones handy. But they're very much more robust than Capitas. These Glencairn glasses.
At school, I liked the practical lessons the best. Can we put a little drop of whiskey in one and you show me how we do this? See, we can do theory or we can do practice.
Right.
Will you have one, John?
I'd love one. That's one of the great noises, isn't it? Whiskey being poured into a glass.
Sorry.
Listen to that noise. Isn't that a noise? Right. So here we are in a Glencairn Crystal glass. And
what have we
it's
got here?
shaped the way it is
I
because...
just picked one off the shelf, Charlie.
Yeah, great.
As you can see, there's a multitude of different whiskies here.
So you're swilling it around.
Yep, swirling it around, and it's also quite good to warm it a little bit. This is quite warm, this one, but the help it to open it up. And then the first thing when you smell is the nose feel effect. What physical effect is it having on your nose? They talk about, nose warming, nose cooling, prickly. But the physical effect. This is quite it's mild, mellow, gentle.
This one's gentle. Yeah, a gentle
And
effect on my
there's very
nose.
little prickle, and I think we'll find that this is about 40% alcohol. 46.
Wow.
And then, no, this is a blended Scotch.
Yeah.
Malts, blended Scotch is more evaluated in the mouth than by the nose, because the theory of blending is that the blender is trying to combine all sorts of characteristics into what they call the integrated flavour complex. And within that complex, really all you can identify is whiskey.
I've never interviewed anybody before who takes a pause in the answer to the whiskey. This is fantastic.
Well,
It's just such a gorgeous thing to do, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
Are you not really pleased that your glasses have been
I'm delighted.
they're around the world, aren't they?
Yes.
how many are you selling now?
It's over 5 million a year.
5 million.
All
yeah.
over
5
the
million.
place. Of course, that brings its problems as well, because our major concern is, if I have a job at all, it's rolling about the street with lawyers, protecting the intellectual property.
Ooh,
It's been copied all over.
really?
Yes, and
So
it's,
this
it's a
invention of
major
your-
concern for us,
Oh, tell me more about that. I didn't know this glass you've invented is being copied.
Yeah, oh yes.
Yeah.
Tens of thousands every year will be being sold by infringers. We have actions going on just now, in fact. A couple in China, one in Singapore, but it's been all over the place. And
Wow.
it's the bane of my existence.
Wow. When you think whiskey, and we are trying to say, look, this is our biggest commodity export, the UK's biggest commodity export. It's a wonderful thing. It's a product that is copied around the world. How important do you think it is to our country that we have this thing called whiskey? Raymond, you first.
It's essential. As you say, it's our biggest export for the whole of the UK. I think it's the biggest export
Commodity, yeah.
commodity, yes. And of course, when we launched it at Whisky Live in 2001, it was an opportune time. I mean, as I mentioned it to you earlier, I designed it 20 years before that, but did nothing with it. It was my oldest son found it in the factory and said, "What's the story with this, Dad?" And I told him, and he was going in to see Richard Patterson that day. Richard enthused about it. We then took it to 4 other very well-known worthies in the industry, master blenders, who are now legends in themselves, and they all enthused about it as well. So, and when I launched it in 2001 in London at Whisky Live, an interesting story that Sukhinder Singh, whom you probably know, Sukhinder had the Whisky Exchange. I had no idea who he was. They come up to me and he said it was worth coming to this show just for that glass. So that was a nice thing to hear, So it's been good for us, and it was launched at the time when malt whiskey was just taking off.
Yeah.
So that was opportune. If I'd done it 20 years beforehand, maybe it would have been more difficult.
Yeah. And Charles, you're one of the best known faces in this country. If you're watching in America, this is one of the best known faces in the country, and principally because you're synonymous with whiskey. You've done a lot of writing on whiskey, a lot of books on whiskey, film role. How important do you think whiskey is to us as a country and on our image abroad?
It was summed up for me, John, by Nick Morgan at a public event. He rather lost his patience with somebody in the audience, and he said, when you buy a bottle of whiskey, you buy a hell of a lot more than liquor in a bottle. You're buying craft, you're buying tradition, you're buying history, you're buying the blood of one small nation.
That's a great way to put it.
Isn't that good?
Oh, aye.
Yeah. I mean, it sums up, it's so much more than just liquor in a bottle. It's got all the baggage, you know, the which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been periods in the history, recent history, where some companies would like to get rid of the baggage and make it more modern, you know, and dispense with the not so much the craft. You never dispense with the craft, but the tartan and haggis and you know, bagpipes, the associations. But as one of your people were saying, we were looking at it a moment ago, some countries would give their eye teeth for these associations, which we just take for granted.
When did you first get into whiskey, Raymond?
I was very young to get into whiskey. Yeah. Late teens.
Right.
And I used to drink in a pub in Airdrie, in my hometown, and there were two old guys drank in the pub, probably younger than I am now, but they were two old guys at the time, and they drank whiskey, and so I started going along with the idea, and I warmed to it quite quickly. And I remember also at that time there were no malt whiskies in the bar.
No.
Malt whiskey just wasn't. You never got malt whiskey in a bar.
Then? Blends.
Yeah.
Blends.
Everyone drank blends.
Johnny. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah. Johnny Walker, Bells,
Yeah.
Grouse, that sort of thing, Lawson's. And I can the bar that I drank in. I can only recall one malt whiskey at the time, and it was Glen Grant 5-year-old, and that lay on that gantry. No one went near it. And I subsequently found out that was a big favourite in Italy.
Yeah.
But it certainly wasn't in the bars in Scotland at that time.
If you're enjoying Cask to Glass, the whiskey podcast with me, John Beattie, we'd love you to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and follow us on socials at C2G Whiskey. That's the letter C, numeral 2, letter G, followed by the word whiskey. And please keep on listening. That's one of the funny things, isn't it, when you go to France and you look at the whiskies on the shelf. I don't know half of these whiskies.
Yeah,
but when did you first get into whiskey? Because you were a writer.
Yeah.
And when did you get into whiskey per se and whiskey writing? And we'll talk about you two going around the world in a minute, because you do go all over the world talking about whiskey. When did you first get into it?
Like Raymond, I probably started at the age of about 16. I spent much of my childhood, my formative years on the Isle of Arran, down the south end of Arran. And the Kildonan Hotel was a favourite haunt. And the good old boys there they would start with pints, and then it would just, without anybody saying, it would become half and half.
Half and half.
And of course, when you became of an age to stand with the farmers and the coast guards and so on who were there, the denizens of the Kildonan Hotel, and you'd be buying around, you know, and of course the whiskey would just come in. Now, I didn't really like that terribly much at the time, but it's an acquired taste. It's very much an acquired taste. And my malt whiskey story, I was at school with the son of the owner of the Glenlivet Distillery. He was privately owned at that time. And I used to go up to Minmore with Charlie Grant, my friend, to go skiing and so on from school. So I probably was given my first Glenlivet in 1967.
Wow.
And by Russell Grant, his dad. And I hate to admit it. So, and this would be, Russell was a great believer. He talked of the tyranny of 12. He thought that slightly younger, 8 years old, 10 years old, was a better. And after 12 years old, it became, in his words, slimy. for some extraordinary reason. And anyway, so I was given a dram we were both given a dram of 10-year-old Glenlivet, which would have been made in the late 1950s. What a joy to come across these things now. But I didn't really like it. It's very much an acquired taste.
You've both taken me back because there was a time, wasn't there, where it was a half and a half.
Oh, yes.
And people watching abroad won't have a Scooby what a half and a half is.
We dined quite recently, and the very first opening dram was a half and a half.
Yeah.
Half a best for me and a half a IPA for you and 2 drams.
Yeah, half a pint and a half, a wee
Yes.
half. Oh, that's what men and women drink.
Half.
Half and a half.
Half and a half.
Half is for a whiskey is really West Coast because a nip on the East Coast. That is half and a half. That's the.
Where do you travel? I mean, we're talking just as you're about to head away, aren't you? I mean, you guys are all over the world talking whiskey. So where have you been, Raymond, and where are you going?
I've been to many of the whiskey shows years ago when we were really starting to promote the glass. So we went to Whiskey Live, Whiskey Fest in the States and various places, France. But I leave that to the team now. They do that. Although I suppose I cherry pick which ones I want to go to. I'm going to the one in Dubai next week. It's the inaugural Whiskey Live in Dubai. And they really take... there was an opening gambit of it last year and it was mobbed. And with serious whiskey drinkers. So it was a pleasure to attend.
Charles, I mean, you're a film star. You're the only film star here. But you've been everywhere, haven't you?
My record year was 2019, where I was 23 times abroad in 17 countries, and it was too much. It was too much. But yes, and I've done a lot of work, mainly for Diageo in India and China and Taiwan. But like Raymond, attending some of these, being invited to attend these shows, and supporting brand owners of one sort or another, and has taken me abroad a lot. And of course, you see, I mean, in spite of I've got laryngitis.
Well, we've both got the same thing. We might as well be honest. We've both got the same thing. Inhaler brought on hoarseness, which I've managed to get over, but you've got it.
Yeah. It's being treated, but I'm going to France for a couple of days in about 10 days' time, followed by a tour of 5 American cities. 2 days later, or 2 days after I come back, and I'm frankly dreading it. And I feel to be doing tastings for, I'm supposed to be smallish groups, 30, 40 people, but it's going to be. Well, I hope the audience can hear me now, but
they can't. You just need a PA system. A big 100-watt PA system. Can I ask you a question? We've got friends of ours at work, and a lot of people, I say, look, we've got this whiskey podcast. I don't like whiskey. Tried it once, don't like it. What would you say to somebody who doesn't like whiskey, Raymond? What should they try if they think, I'm watching in America or I'm watching in England because most of our whiskey is exported and I don't like whiskey? I
mean, once again, it comes back to the style of the glass. I always tell someone to take it to their nose, first of all, and do that a minimum of 5 times.
Before you sip it.
And it'll acclimatise. Because if you just pick up a whiskey and drink it, if you've never tasted it before, you're likely to say, I'll never have one of those again. But if you let your nose acclimatise itself to what's in the glass, that informs your mouth of what's coming, and you'll find it easier and more pleasurable.
5 times.
I would always do that.
5 times.
Yeah, I would always suggest that to someone who's trying it for the first time. Yeah.
Charles.
That sounds like Richard Patterson.
That's what it is. Although Richard, you mentioned getting the glass and warming it. Richard abhors that.
Yeah.
Remind people, who's Richard Patterson?
He's the long-standing master blender with White and Mackay.
Right.
Over 50 years.
50 years. And he says sniff 5 times.
He probably says 3 times, I think, hello, how are you?
Oh, that's
fine,
right.
how are you?
That's what I think you are. Yeah.
But it works.
Funnily enough, often it's the smell of whiskey that puts people off. And so that might backfire. My wife, for example, she was the smell of whiskey. A lot of younger people in Scotland have been scunnered for whiskey, and usually after a very boozy Hogmanay, when they were about that age, about 16, 17, and sometimes it's put them off for life.
Trust me, you get over it, Charlie. You get over it.
By the way, scunnered means slightly disappointed by it.
I think that if for someone who really doesn't like it, try it in a cocktail. I mean, a whiskey sour, for example, is a lovely drink. And, you can, the taste of the whiskey comes through, but only slightly through the lemon juice and so on. I was the first editor for Whiskey magazine. And before the first issue came out, I found myself sitting beside, I don't know if you ever came across her, she was described as Scotland's only supermodel. Honor Fraser was her name.
I know who she is.
Yeah,
I've never met
she's
her.
in America now. I think she's married in America. But she was absolutely stunning. And for want of anything better to say, I said, do you like whiskey? And she said that she loves whiskey sours. And I said, you wouldn't consider appearing on the cover of this new magazine. And the idea of a gorgeous woman drinking a cocktail, and it would be in a martini glass, rather than an elder middle-aged man.
Like us.
The negotiations with her agent between the owners of the magazine broke down, and they put Rob Wainwright on the cover.
Rob Wainwright. I was with Rob last week. You know Rob?
Yeah, I've met him.
Oh, he's a lovely man.
Guy. Lovely guy.
Do you know, Rob Wainwright has raised so much money for Doddy Weir's MND charity. And I saw him at Murrayfield. I was interviewing him at Murrayfield rugby place last weekend, and he cycled 170 miles every day.
Lord.
And people were coming up to him at the function saying, we'd like to give you £10,000. Thank you so much. And I think they'd raised by then, I think Doddy's charity has spent 13 million.
Is that right?
In MND research.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're diverting away. But Rob Wainwright's an amazing man and a whiskey lover. He loves his whiskey.
Yeah.
He loves his whiskey. So the modern whiskey market is a complex thing, isn't it? You've got the global powers, making their own whiskies. You've got whiskey with an E in it. You've got American whiskey, Indian whiskey, Chinese whiskey. Where do you think the whiskey world's going, Raymond?
Well, I was surprised. The first time I went to, in fact, I think you were there, Charlie. We went to Hong Kong, the first whiskey live in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
In fact, you were. And we were astonished at the amount of young people who attended that whiskey show, and indeed the amount of female young people who were at that show. So it's becoming acceptable to that genre. And that's great. That's good for the industry. But I don't know how well it's doing just now. It seems to be slowing down just a bit. But
you think more of a younger person's drink than it used to be?
Oh, yes.
In certain markets.
Right.
In certain markets, yes.
Not in the traditional markets, UK, US. And I would think probably, and the growth of female drinkers as well. Not in every market by any means, but the industry is concerned at the moment that Generation Z is it Z that but you see they're too young. I think goes from 18 to 27,
right?
And that is pretty young to be acquiring a taste for whiskey, but also centennials, so a bit older, they'd rather. A, they're not going to the pub anymore. B, they're put off by the price. C, they're put off considerably by the stupid World Health Organization coming up with ridiculous, any alcohol is bad for you. And indeed, Scotch whisky is ranked as a super bad, along with sort of chicken nuggets and things like that. I mean, it's absurd.
But it's not seen now as an old man's drink. I think it's seen more rather than an aspirational drink.
Yeah,
especially in the eastern countries.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But the real problem is, John, that with the last 10 years, let's say, has been a period of growth in Scotch whisky, measured in terms of the volume of spirit that is being made, the number of new distilleries, unprecedented in the entire history of Scotch whisky. And in parallel with that, whisky is now being made by my last reckoning, in 87 countries. You know, not only the original ones, which are Ireland, America, Canada, Japan. But now, you know, I mean, it's quite incredible, the burgeoning. Now, how is this going to affect? I mean, in other words, we've got more liquid than there is demand for already, even just with Scotch. And this brought down, caused a crisis in the early 1980s. It caused a crisis in 1900. We you know, so there is a considerable, a grave possibility that we might be heading into a crisis period.
But another thing I've noticed, Charlie, when I started, everyone knows Glencairn for the Glencairn Glass. But as I mentioned earlier, I started the company 20 years before that, and the company was started to my vision was to try. I would go along to a whiskey company, talk to the director, and suggest that they put their old or rare whiskies into a crystal decanter. And that's still 50% of our business. But people come into the showroom, they don't realise we do all this stuff. And at the time, it was the smaller whiskey companies who were prepared to put their aged or rare whiskies into a crystal decanter. And at that time, they were all going to Japan, it was, in fact, 40 years ago. But all the whiskey companies now realise that there's good money to be had by putting their whiskies into crystal decanters. And so if you look around the showroom, there's 40, 50, 60-year-old, 75-year-old whiskies here. And the big boys didn't want to know that when I started. So that was another string to the bow, if you like.
I wonder if whiskey actually will just keep performing, because if the world, you know, when I was born, the world's population was 3 billion. It's now 7-8 billion. It's heading for 11.
It's your fault.
Yes, I've produced, but it's extraordinary the way the world's population is increasing.
Yes,
you know, and the populations of India and China are huge, 1.5 billion each. How do you get that export market to buy into Scotch whisky then? Well, given it's huge, it's a huge number of people.
It has huge cachet. China and India are really the big hopefuls.
Yeah.
But these local markets all depend upon local economics.
But also that's where the word aspirational comes in again, I think, Charlie.
Right. That's right.
Because the Indians are aspiring to get better and better, and Scotch whisky's coming along in the coattails of that, because I think the majority of people see Scotch as being better than their own local whisky, so they aspire to be able to afford it and drink it.
But it's very, very heavily taxed.
Right.
I mean, India drinks more whiskey than all the other countries put together. I mean, millions and millions of 9-litre cases. But of the top 10 best-selling by volume whiskies, so-called whiskies, in the world, 7 are Indian. The only non-Indian is Johnny Walker, Jack Daniels, and Jim Beam.
All right, so it's local Indian-produced whiskey for the Indian population, which will be cheaper because it's not taxed.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
But the Indians aspire, because they love, and they talk about counterfeiting, and counterfeiting runs amok in refilling bottles, forging right from the start. because there is such a demand, and this also reflects on, is there a threat from, there's now some extremely good Indian whiskies, Indian malt whiskies, Amrut and Port John and so on. Is this going to be a threat on, and indeed in any other market? There are now approaching 56 whiskey distilleries in China, and they'll present some of them very big outfits.
Yeah.
Is this going to be a threat to Scotch? No, because Scotch has all the backstory, and it's got all the experience, and it's got the generations of craft to develop the flavours.
And you can't call it Scotch.
And you
You
can't
can't call it Scotch.
That's the secret. Yeah, that's
that's
the golden nugget.
Yeah.
I'm interested, again, for people listening and watching, and I don't know how comfortable you are talking about brands. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're tied into certain brands and you can't discuss it. But let's say you're talking to somebody who wants to try a whiskey. And I'll maybe get to what is your favourite whiskey, if you can say that, because it's one of these. It's like saying, what was your favourite game of rugby? Don't know. Can't remember.
It's difficult.
They're all great. It's brilliant times you had. But if you were to recommend a wee whiskey for someone to try as a starting block, could you say what it would be? Do you think?
I think if I go into a bar and I'm faced with a wall of different whiskies, I'm looking at them all and I can't make up my mind. Generally, I'll say, give me a black label.
Yeah.
Johnny Walker Black Label.
It's a blend. It's a good starting point. It gives me time to peruse the gantry. Yeah.
Charles?
My recommendation is to a novice is to go to a bar with, say, a couple of friends, a bar which has been well equipped and with and hopefully a knowledgeable bartender, and say we want 3 large whiskies of a very different character. So you might have a smoky one.
Good idea.
Or you might have an American one, a Japanese one, and an Irish one, whatever. Let's see. And then share and share. So they need to be presented in a Glencairn glass.
Of course.
And large ones, because you share and share, nose and taste and discuss, and then decide which of the 3 you would like to taste more of. So let's say one of them was a smoky one. Then you say to the bartender, can we have 3 more in that smoky style? Different whiskies, So Lefroy, Gardbeg, Like
so you're on 9 whiskies. 3 times 3.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I come with you the next time?
But but it's only through exploring, and you can't expect people to go out and lash out, a lot of money to buy a bottle of whiskey that they might not like.
Because the beauty is they're so different, aren't they? I mean, I remember my brother-in-law, Richard Taylor, and I were, I think it was a celebration of my mother-in-law's birthday, but we were in the old Macri Hotel in Isla, when it was just a wee hotel, but there was a whiskey bar, and there were lots of whiskies behind the bar, and we, first of all, there were different colours. What different colours?
Yeah.
And different tastes. There are hundreds of different whiskies, aren't there? To say you don't like a whiskey when you haven't tried many of them is difficult, isn't it? Because they're all so different.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
And there's one for every time of day.
It is the most complex spirit.
It is.
Yeah.
So
It is the most complex spirit in the world.
If you had to take one whiskey to your deathbed, what would it be?
Oh, I would go
I've not
for.
asked this question before, but we'll try it.
I would request rather an aged blend.
Blend.
I would go for an aged blend.
'Cause the modern-
I'm spoiled. I've been spoiled. The master blenders have spoiled me for. They know I like a blend, and of course we do lots of whiskies for the whiskey decanters for the whiskey industry, and I always plump for an aged blend if I can get it.
Despite the modern world, you right at this very start of this conversation, you talked about the rise of malts.
Yes.
So despite the rise of the malt, which people would think is the real whiskey, well, I want a single malt, whatever it was,
Yeah.
you'd go for a blend.
Probably would, yes.
Wow.
I mean, their malts there, I think, are fabulous. But I think I'd be content with an aged blend.
Charles.
Same here.
Really?
Absolutely. I'm privileged to. A large part of my work is assessing nosing and tasting malt whiskies. And like Raymond, I mean, I get to see some amazing whiskies. A lot of these ones, the 70-year-old malt, like, you know, the was all gone under my 50-year-old Balvenie. All adored, I've assessed them. But so when I just want to drink without thinking about it, so malt whiskies work for me. If I just want to drink, a gargle, as they say in Ireland, I would go for blend. And I can see that I would go for Johnny Walker Black Label.
Really?
I think it's a perfectly made whiskey. And just above it, of course, is Blue Label, which is 5 times as expensive. But it's so smooth, Blue Label, that I would really prefer a Black Label.
It's been an honour talking to two legends of the industry. Big film stars. and I like a guy who's invented something. There's something about. I used to be an accountant. I was a civil engineer, so I helped build the Edinburgh City Bypass. Then I retrained as a chartered accountant. And I always liked talking to businessmen who made it, which is you two, because they have an idea, but crucially make it into a business, don't they? So you had this brilliant idea, which is this, and you made it into a global business, which is brilliant. So thank you very much.
Really pleased about it. And what's even more pleased about, my sons are carrying on the business, and I don't need to get involved this heavily.
What do they say? Clogs to clogs in 3 generations.
Well, I'll spend it just now then.
Yeah. So what's the future for your business then, do you think?
It's a healthy business, and the boys and the team we've got around us, and you've not had a chance to meet the people in the factory yet, but they're a great team, and some of them have been with us for more than 30 years. And I should point out, which I always do, you'll know this, Charlie, there's a guy who worked for me for just short of 30 years, a man called Jim Drysdale. He was an artist, one of life's gentlemen, a fabulous guy, and the best artist I've ever come across. He had great ideas. And when my first factory was only 1,000 square foot, and there was only Jim and I, 2 key holders. And he was amazing, and he sadly died in 2012. But what a great loss he was to us. But the team since that we've built up are very good and very capable, and it allows me to not bother having to come in.
Scaling up. Well done. Fantastic. And Charles, you've been such a success, haven't you?
I've been extremely fortunate.
That's what people who are good say, isn't it? I've just been lucky. People know who you are. People trust what you say, and you've got this global image, which is, you don't just get that, do you? You have to work at it, and you've worked at it.
I think I've served my time. Yeah, I started writing about Scotch whisky in 1981, so I've been doing it for quite a long time, and I've written quite a number of books on the subject. Currently writing.
There's a new one out, I hear.
No, the current book I'm working on is about blended Scotch. Apropos what we were talking about.
We've served a good apprenticeship at the drinking, Charlie.
No, I think I have been fortunate. I've played my small part in developing the category after the bad times of the 80s, when it was largely salvaged, the industry, by the rediscovery of malt whiskey. And I wrote a number of books about malt whiskey during the late 80s and 90s. And of course, it's been then since the millennium, it's more or less gone ballistic. And but I don't know. We've got this Loch, this whiskey Loch filling. Some describe it as a whiskey ocean, and
we could play our part in trying to reduce it, couldn't we?
We'll do our best.
Yeah.
Great to talk to you both.
Really,
honoured to be in your company, and good on you. Thank you.
It's been lovely, John. Thank you very much.
For coming along, John. It's been great.
We're never going home. We're never going home. Can we stay with you in Scotland for the rest?